Welcome to Built with Purpose. I am Chris Fay, and this is the show where vision meets execution and leadership leaves a legacy. From design studios to innovation hubs and product lines to skylines, we meet the people building more than great companies. They're creating culture, driving impact, and shaping what's next. These are the stories and strategies behind how the world gets built with purpose.
All right, welcome to Built with Purpose. Today is another episode of Between the Builds. We are in the middle of Q1 in 2026. It's crazy. The clocks just got set back or set forward, swung forward, and man, it's crazy how fast time is going. Last week, we had a great conversation with Steve Dell'Orto, and was actually reflecting back on his conversation over the weekend because I was talking to my son who's playing lacrosse. And one of the things that Steve and I started our conversation out with was this conversation around lacrosse. His kids play lacrosse, mine did too, so we kind of chatted about that. And my son is a sophomore in high school and has been playing lacrosse since being a young kid. And the reflection that we began going back on is how important the fundamentals are on lacrosse. And I'll never forget when my son first started playing. He had an amazing coach that had played at the top levels of the lacrosse circuit. And he said, look, man, he said, the fundamentals are what differentiate you from everybody else. If you're out there doing the wall ball nonstop, right hand, left hand, passing, catching, throwing, shooting, those are the basic fundamentals that really set people apart. And oftentimes I think as leaders or as professionals in our job and our lives, we sometimes make things way too complex. We start focusing on things that are far beyond basic core fundamentals. And so as I was kind of thinking about our Between the Builds episode today, I thought about this conversation around fundamentals would be a great one. And I'll give you a great example. So one of the things we talk about inside of our organization, especially with the sales organization, the difference between successful salespeople and non-successful salespeople. There's a laundry list of stuff. But one of the things that we always talk about is the art and science of selling. The art is your ability to communicate and negotiate and develop rapport and all of those pieces, okay? The science of selling is prospecting, like actually doing the activity, meeting with clients, developing opportunities, running sales cycles, kind of I won't say the boring, but just the executionary tasks. And when I look at the difference in the art and the science of selling, where most salespeople fall down is not in the art. It is always historically the selling and the science. So what does that mean? Well, if we ever have an underperforming salesperson and you go in and you start talking to them about what's going on, and there's some issues in training, maybe some enablement, maybe they need coaching and some personality skills, but every single time, if a salesperson is not hitting quota, you immediately go to the quota and you start reverse engineering the plan. All right, well, have you generated enough opportunities to yield the number that you are trying to achieve? And 99 times out of 100, the answer is no. Okay, well, why are you not establishing enough opportunities? Well, you're going to back up. How many times are you talking about, our organization and what's going on out there in the marketplace? Never having enough meetings. Why aren't you having enough meetings? It's always back to the core activity, just not doing the grunt work that it takes to establish meetings and opportunities in sales. And that is really the lineage of a sales process, is you have to generate activity that is going to create a meeting or a conversation with a customer. That conversation is going to ultimately open up some sort of opportunity for you to do business with them. And then that opportunity will ultimately close. And so it's super interesting. And we talk about this a lot inside of our organization, is where people are falling down are the fundamentals. It's the simple task execution. It's not the negotiation skills. It's not the rapport building. It's actually just doing the work and what it takes to successfully succeed as a salesperson. So it's core fundamentals. Same thing in lacrosse. You can get out there and get fancy with your footwork and, shooting behind the back and, trying to do all sorts of funky things. But if you can't catch and throw the ball extremely efficiently, you're going to have an extremely hard time doing some of those artsy things that you would want to do in lacrosse. And so what does that mean for us as leaders? Well, sometimes maybe it's the same thing. What makes a really strong and effective leader? It's interesting. I talk to a lot of business owners and a lot of leaders and a lot of executives, and everybody's a little bit different. You have leaders that are highly charismatic, highly inspirational, can motivate teams to take action to the next step. But then I've also met very successful entrepreneurs and leaders that are not great at inspirational messaging. They don't love speaking in front of people, right? But they've done something extremely well that has brought them success in their career. And so you start looking across all of these things, like everybody, if I think about this as it relates to fundamentals, and I think about this as it relates to the art and science of leadership. The art is oftentimes the things that we see. They can speak very well. They're delivering an engaging message. They really know how to develop rapport with their employees. Those are the arts. But when you really study what's going on with really successful companies, it's oftentimes the fundamentals. It's the fundamentals and the science of leadership. So just like before, we talked about a salesperson, you need to generate activities. Those activities yield meetings. Those meetings yield opportunities, and those opportunities bring you closed business. And if you reverse engineer that, closed business is created from opportunities, opportunities from meetings, and meetings from activity. So how does that translate into the science of leadership? Well, if you want a successful company, you need to have an effective vision of where you're going, why you're going that direction. That's kind of the goal. If you take a step back, that vision and that plan needs to be effectively communicated out to your organization. You need to have tactical milestones and KPIs and priorities that are ultimately going to yield success towards that goal. You need to track those KPIs and those priorities on a consistent basis and hold individuals accountable with time-based outcomes. So if you've ever familiar with things like EOS and traction or rhythm or scaling up, all of these are operating systems for running a company. And yeah, there are some art components of it, of how are you doing certain things, but most of those systems teach the tactics. They teach the science, because that's where a lot of leaders fall down. Just like my sales example, where do salespeople typically fall down? It's in the fundamentals. Where do leaders fall down? It's in the fundamentals. So in order to have a successful group, organization, what have you, you have to establish a plan. And then you need to manage that plan consistently over time, holding individuals accountable to time-based outcomes and tracking that on a consistent basis. That is the core fundamentals of leadership. And to make sure that you're also communicating that plan with all the individuals inside of the company so they know what to do, how to do it, where to be. And so I want you to kind of think about this as it relates to your role. No matter if you're running a person or a team of one or a large organization. And you think about kind of the art and the science of that salesperson we were talking about. You think about the art and the science of that lacrosse game that we were talking about. And you think about the art and the science of leadership and execution. What are the things that ultimately drive success? Art is an amazing impact, but you have to get the fundamentals down correct. You have to get the science down. And I would bet that if you go into your organization or you go into your team and you try and dissect, where have we fallen down in the past? Where have been the areas that we've not been as effective inside of our company? Why have we not moved the needle forward far enough? I would bet you that 99 times out of 100, it's probably because there was a slippage of some sort of fundamental. And I can just be very reflective inside of our company. One of the things that we have gotten significantly better at, we're not great, but we're significantly better. We used to be very good at establishing a vision. And we would be very good at beginning to roll that vision out to everybody. We were terrible at the ongoing execution. And so what would happen is we were always rolling out initiatives, and those initiatives would wane and slip over time, because if you're not driving them consistently and holding people accountable, day in and day out and week after week, people will default back to old habits. And so we were consistently rolling things out, but they weren't getting traction. And they weren't getting traction because we were not focusing on the fundamentals. We were not holding people accountable. We were not managing that day after day and week after week to success. And so we've now brought that back and said, we have to nail these foundational fundamentals in order to do what we need to do inside of our company. So think about that this week. What's the one thing that you can do to improve on the fundamentals in your business, in your role, or in your leadership position? What's the one area that you feel weak on, or maybe not consistent on? Do you need to establish a one-on-one cadence with one of your individuals? Do you need to establish a weekly reminder email that goes out to your organization to remind them of the key priorities? Do you have a plan for the year? Do you have a plan for 2026 and key milestones that are going to get you from where you are today to the end of the year? Pick one thing this week and improve that step by step. Next week, get even better. Next week, get even better. And you will wrap up March, you will wrap up this quarter in a much better situation by focusing on one fundamental that you can improve. And what do we know? How long does it take to develop a habit? On average, about 66 days. All right? So just because you do it over the next week or two doesn't mean this is now a habit. You need to do this consistently over months in order to have this become second nature inside of your leadership methodology. So I hope this helps. Fundamentals is always an awesome topic in sports, in business, in any role. I hope you all have an awesome week. Let's continue to build with purpose. Okay, thanks for joining me on Built with Purpose. If you have enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It helps more bold leaders find the show. For resources and show notes, visit our website and connect with me, Chris Fay, on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep building great companies, cultures, and legacies with purpose.